Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Mozart's Don Giovanni, which was live from the Royal Opera House and which I saw last night at the UCI Kinowelt Berlin. The conductor was Hartmut Händchen, the production was done by Kasper Holten, the sets were done by S. Devlin, the costumes were done by Anja van Krach, the videographer was Luke Halls, the choreographer was Signe Fabricius, the lights were handled by Bruno Poet, the fight choreographer was Kate Walters, and the chorus master was William Spaulding. I was quite excited to check out this particular production of Don Giovanni because it did look really interesting given how Mr. Holten headed this production and how he managed to put his vision in this said production, and because of the two male leads who sang the roles of Don Giovanni and Leporello, Erwin Schrott and Roberto Tagliavini. I will gladly talk about them as well as the rest of the singers much later in this review, but first, my thoughts on the production. Overall, I did find this rather intriguing in terms of the overall look and feel of the entire production headed by Kasper Holten. It's presented akin to a labyrinth. We see a one set piece, which is essentially a white building with different types of video designs and imagery to show what the mind of Don Giovanni is like. And even while the overture is still playing, we see a list of the women he has seduced from all around the world, as if though that this is his life. The women he seduced, everything about the luxury that he has, and his overall licentiousness. And we do not see that Donna Anna gets raped, but she manages to have her first sexual awakening with the Don. And speaking of Donna Anna, she's presented as someone who is torn between three men: the paternal love that she has for her father, the Commendatore, that sensual love and intimacy that she had with Don Giovanni, and her duty as a fiancé to her betrothed one, Don Ottavio. So this is a rather interesting dynamic that we get to see from Donna Anna in this production. And instead of a fencing duel between Don Giovanni and the Commendatore, we basically see the Commendatore holding out a knife and Don Giovanni just disarming him from his said knife and stabbing him, which is kind of anticlimactic in my eyes, because I would have really loved to see Erwin Schrott and Petros Margulas have a go at their supposed fencing duel and see just how well they parried, riposted, and in Don Giovanni's case, gave the Commendatore the touche that ultimately killed him. And this Don Giovanni isn't presented as someone who is a scoundrel, who loves making people's lives miserable and is so high and mighty about it while deflowering all the virgins as he can. We see this Don Giovanni being rather conflicted, especially what happens to him in the final act of the opera. In the cemetery, we see that he is in some pain, considering that he did stab the Commendatore on the abdomen area, and we see that pain being reflected on him, which is to show that the Commendatore's curse on Don Giovanni has just begun. And the curse begins with that said wound, which ends up infesting, especially when the Commendatore appears as a ghost. Moreover, in the dinner scene, we see that Don Giovanni has completely lost it. And for some reason, Leporello even turns into a ghost, probably to show the madness that Don Giovanni is now experiencing. His licentious lifestyle, his horrible misdeeds, and everything that has defined his life are all biting him in the behind. And what makes this even more heightened is that once Don Giovanni gets quote-unquote dragged down to hell, all the names of the women he has seduced are erased, and what's left of his house is basically all white. And after his final scream, we hear the offstage voices of Leporello, Masetto, Don Ottavio, Donna Elvira, Donna Anna, and Zerlina singing their final number on him, and it basically cuts abruptly, which I found rather unusual. Nevertheless, the costumes looked absolutely gorgeous on everyone. The biggest standout for me has to be that of Donna Anna's costumes, which also has that huge black ink stain to show that she's not only one of Don Giovanni's conquests, but is also someone who ended up staining her own engagement with Don Ottavio because she ended up in a tryst with the Don. And I also love Donna Elvira's costume, which also shows that even though she is a noblewoman from Burgos who has a lot of stateliness, she's someone who is hurting and mourning inside because of the fact that she has been jilted by this licentious gentleman. So overall, the production might be absolutely fascinating in terms of its visual effects and the look of the costumes, but I do have some mixed feelings with how some of the characters were portrayed. Oh, sure, I did enjoy just how Leporello managed to be the overall straight man, as if though he were both the devil and the angel of Don Giovanni, but the way they made Don Giovanni was kinda head-scratching. Seriously, Don Giovanni is someone we're supposed to love to hate. He's someone who enjoys and thrives in the corrupt. He enjoys the absolute pleasures of deflowering virgins, and he just has a lot of fun with his brand of hedonism. In this production, I thought he just came off as someone who tended to be rather brooding, melancholy, yet still maintains his cynical charm, which is the one thing that made Don Giovanni quite well known as a character. To paraphrase Diva from Musical Hell, much like the Phantom of the Opera, Don Giovanni is likable if he has all of these negative traits. He's almost akin to a vampire, and not the Edward Cullen kind. I mean the Dracula kind. So mixed feelings on what they have done with Don Giovanni aside, I still have to say that this production was quite the visual feast. And now we get to the singers, starting off with Erwin Schrott as Don Giovanni. Now, for those of you who know me, I sort of have a love-hate relationship with Erwin Schrott, to the point where I have completely mixed feelings about this particular singer. On the one hand, I do love his dedication to his craft. I do love how he's able to put himself in this role, and I do love the overall diligence he manages to give to each and every role he sings, and how much charisma, charm, and intellect that he manages to inject each and every character, thus making him quite lifelike on the stage and giving his characters a lot more dimension, a lot more personality, and a lot more introspection when all is said and done. And he's also someone who's worked very hard to get where he is now. Moreover, he does take advantage of his movie star good looks to bring roles such as Don Giovanni, Escamillo, and even the four villains to life. He does so in a way that makes him quite credible as an actor, especially in these devilish, debonair charmer roles. On the other hand, I have extremely mixed feelings about his voice. It's finely tuned in the right places, but I find it lacking in a certain depth and a certain richness and roundness that I love in many a bass baritone or a basso cantante. There are times I feel like he's missing something. I feel like he's missing that extra oomph that should give his voice a lot more dimension and a lot more passion, even though he does his very best to let his voice out with as much passion as possible. I can't deny the fact that his voice just sounds kind of small compared to a lot of the great bassos, bass baritones, and baritones of the past who have embodied Don Giovanni. In my ears, I can never go wrong with the likes of Alexander Kipnis, Ezio Pinza, Roberto Silva, Jerome Hines, Giorgio Tozzi, Nicola Rossi Lemani, Cesare Siepi, Theo Adam, Nikolai Gyaurov, José Soyer, Samuel Raimi, Francesco Alero d'Artegna, Ferruccio Furlanetto, James Morris, and even Carlo Colombara. Heck, even the baritones of the past, such as Tito Gobbi, Tita Ruffo, Mattia Battistini, Ettore Bastianini, and Giuseppe Taddei, managed to sound much fuller and richer and rounder and far more developed than Erwin Schrott could ever be. So in that sense, he does pale in comparison to a lot of those great singers of the past, which is a huge shame because Erwin Schrott has naturally interesting material, which makes him challenge himself to reach for those depths in each and every role that he's singing nowadays. Now, if he is to sing these roles more properly and with the right technique and with the right voice, he needs to develop his core a lot more. That means he really has to keep strengthening his chest tones if he is to sing all of these wonderful roles in future engagements. And once he develops those chest tones, once he keeps developing his core, and once he continues to bring a lot more roundness, richness, and depth to his voice, we might have a voice that could be decent enough to sing all of these bigger roles. However, I still have to give him credit for his charisma when bringing Don Giovanni to life. It's a role that he's been singing from the late 90s all the way up to today. I first learned about this gentleman when he sung Don Giovanni at the Los Angeles Opera House, and I believe that one of the first times he did it was back in either 2002 or 2003. Well, he was still a young singer. There's still a lot of potential for him to be a much better singer than what he could have been. And as I stated before, he just needs to keep strengthening those chest tones, develop that core, and just bring a lot more depth, roundness, and richness to it. Because as it is, I just feel like something was missing. But I still gotta give it to him for being brave enough to tackle this role, which he has been singing for several years. Roberto Tagliavini indubitably stole the show as Leporello. He managed to take advantage of his finely tuned and absolutely well-focused basso cantante voice to bring the role of this manservant to life. He definitely had it all. A richly tuned voice, an absolutely strong stage presence, and heaps of discipline that he managed to exude so wonderfully. Is he just as great as, let's say, Virgilio Lazzari, Salvatore Baccaloni, Italo Taio, Fernando Corena, Carlo Badioli, Otto Edelman, Paolo Montarsolo, Vladimiro Gonzarolli, Ezio Flagello, Ferruccio Furlanetto, and many other great Leporellos of the past? Not really, because I do feel that those other singers were a lot rounder, richer, and had far more development. With Roberto Tagliavini, he's still as solid as ever. In fact, he managed to steal the show from everyone, not just from the male cast members, but also the female ones as well. And that's certainly saying something. And I also hope that with that countenance of his and with that voice that he has, I do hope that he takes on the role of the Don himself, because he does have everything that could make a great Don Giovanni. So here's also hoping that he makes the jump from singing Leporello to singing the role of Don Giovanni. Maybe in the near future, who knows? He's got it, and I'm sure that he can sell it. Petros Margulas was kind of a disappointment as the Commendatore, even though he did get a bit better in his great scene, Don Giovanni a Cenarteco. In the first part of the opera, I thought he sounded kind of woofy, woolly, and rather unsupported. But the later part of the opera, he was at his strongest, but it was not enough to convince me that this is an imposing basso profondo voice who should be singing the Commendatore. In my ears, I have the voices of Ludwig Weber, Gottlob Frick, Kurt Böhmer, Josef Greindl, Arnold van Mill, Martti Talvela, Matti Salminen in his prime, and even that of Robert Lloyd and Jaakko Rehenen, just to name a few, because those were big, powerful, and rich voices that can sing the Commendatore. We could have even gotten voices like, let's say, Morris Robinson, Riccardo Zanellato, or Mika Kares. Those voices have a lot more strength and chest and a lot more depth to be found when singing this rather thankless part. But with Petros Margulas, I kind of have to salute him for what he managed to do as the Commendatore. He did a rather brave job in tackling this role, which he has been singing for quite some time, and at least he was able to make something of himself in the Commendatore scene. Daniel Bayle was a solid Don Ottavio, and even though he gave it his all in terms of how he sang this particular role and how he embodied this character with a lot of youth and a lot of chivalry, there's just something about him that kind of rubs me the wrong way in terms of how he sounded. There were times that he sounded a bit nasal, and there were times that he was singing in the mask, which should never be the case even for a true lyric tenor. When you have other more well-developed voices such as Solomon Patpataki, John McCormick, Herman Jadlovker, Anton Dermota, and even the late great Jerry Hadley singing this role with such abandon and with a great technique, you kind of realize that something is missing with Daniel Bayle, even though he did give it his all, even though he did sing all of his arias with some amount of precision and a lot of abandon as well. My big problem was just how he modulated some of his vowels. Instead of pure pharyngeal singing and of course making his mouth go vertical, there were times that he did some very weird actions with his mouth, which befuddled me, and it made me wonder, what's he even doing? It just puts me on a state of befuddlement to see what on earth he was doing with his mouth movements. And I seriously hope that if he is to sing a lot better and a lot more freely, he's gotta keep the mouth vertical instead of horizontal and avoid singing in the mask and really sing from the pharynx, complete with all the chest tones, a good head voice, and an excellent technique. Daniel Bayle is someone who does have great material to work with, but I seriously hope that he gets rid of some of those annoying habits and really stick to singing with a vertical mouth and true pharyngeal singing. Leon Koshevich was a decent masetto. We have at our disposal all of the great voices from the past who had richer voices and who had more well-developed voices singing this peasant boy. With Leon Koshevich, what I could give him credit for is that he at least embodied this role with a lot of passion and a lot of charm. And I seriously hope that he does develop his voice a lot more because it does have potential to grow. For now, it sounds like it could use a lot more support, a lot more oomph, a lot more chest, a lot more core, and just a lot more vocal strength. Malin Bistrom throws herself in with such abandon as Donna Anna. I cannot go wrong with this particular full lyric soprano. She has a very creamy, rich, and awesomely tuned timbre. She does have a voice that has clean focus, powerful laser-like attacks, and of course, a lot of abandon in terms of how she portrayed Donna Anna. Her voice could be a lot richer, rounder, more beautiful, and a lot more focused if she is to get rid of singing in the nose, singing in the mask, get rid of that horizontal mouth. She should instead keep her mouth vertical instead of horizontal and really focus all of that singing in the pharynx and keep on using chest tones, because even though there were some chest tones in some places here and there, I felt like there were some places where she was rather hesitant. I don't have to tell her that chest tones are her friends. They give her all the necessary drama. They give her the necessary drama and all of that drive and passion that make opera great. So I seriously hope that she does get rid of the annoying habit of singing in the nose, singing in the mask, singing with a horizontal mouth, and focuses more on keeping that mouth vertical, keeping those chest tones intact, and maintain a sense of true pharyngeal singing. It was announced that Christine Rice was indisposed as Donna Elvira, so instead we have Mirto Papatanasiu, a soprano I've been following ever since I was a teenager, and a soprano who also boasts quite a huge repertoire, from the dramatic coloratura soprano roles of Violetta Valeri and Luisa Miller to the lyrical roles of Mimi. She's also someone who has sung Donna Anna and also alternates between that and Donna Elvira. And from what I heard from her voice last night, I kind of pity her because it sounded weak. It sounded unsupported, and it sounded like it didn't really have much core in the beginning. But in the second part of the opera, it did get a little bit better. She was able to sound a little bit fuller and a little bit richer, but that wasn't really enough to salvage her overall vocal performance. Pretty sure it was the classic case of being a last-minute replacement, and even the nerves of being in this particular position because of the rehearsal time and because of everything that has happened, how much she had to prepare for this role, and just how little time she had to warm up her voice in order to sing Donna Elvira, and it kind of showed. I felt like the voice didn't really have enough time to properly warm up and to be at its full potential, which is a big shame because Mirto Papatanasiu does have a sizable repertoire, and I'm pretty sure that this was not her best day. So I do feel pretty sorry for her. While I cannot deny those circumstances, I cannot also deny the fact that we also had such fuller sounding Donna Elviras who had far more developed voices. Voices that come into my mind are the likes of Carla Gavazzi, Eleanor Stieber, Leonie Rezenek, Montserrat Caballé, Gondola Janowitz, and even the likes of Carita Matila and Melanie Dina. Those were fuller sounding, richer, and voices that had a lot more core to them. In terms of Mirto Papatanasiu, even though I had to give her credit for embodying Donna Elvira and her yearning and longing and her obsession with Don Giovanni, I cannot deny the problems that she had with her voice. I'm sure that if she develops her core, keeps developing those chest tones for the necessary drama and for giving her characters a lot more dimension, I'm pretty sure that her voice will be in more tip-top shape, and I'm pretty sure that she will have a lot more time to prepare in the near future. However, among the women, I felt that Louise Alder stood out the most. She really showed just how much she can do with her light lyric soprano voice in embodying Zerlina. She was able to make her such a multifaceted character, and she was able to bring in so much warmth, beauty, and emotion that I was practically standing on cloud 9. And I also hope that she continues to develop her technique in the right way and that she keeps growing as a fine, young lyric soprano. I also have to give some kudos to Josephine Arden for embodying Donna Elvira's chambermaid in all of her beauty and in all of her youth and sweetness. So overall, the singing was rather hit and miss. While there were some disappointments to be found, and there were some singers that I had very mixed feelings with, there were two singers that stood out above the rest, and those were Roberto Tagliavini's tall, handsome, and virile Leporello, and Louise Alder's well-disciplined and gorgeously toned Zerlina. Those two singers managed to do a very fine job in their parts, and I seriously hope that their voices will not only grow in richness and in great direction, but I also hope that their careers will be just as strong and ever flourishing. And the conducting done by Hartmut Henschen was well timed, precise, and extremely meticulous. He was able to pay attention to what he was doing to the text and the music. He made sure that everyone went along flawlessly. And of course, the chorus and orchestra of the Royal Opera House were, as always, absolutely amazing. So overall, with a visual feast of a production of Don Giovanni, combined with some really great singing found in Roberto Tagliavini and Louise Alder, who stood out above the rest as the stars of the evening, and some really great conducting done by Hartmut Henschen, last night's production of Don Giovanni was a pretty mixed bag. But there were some gems to be found, and I could still say that everyone did a fine job in at least collaborating and at least playing to their strengths with everything that they had. They all did their best, and for that, I still have to give them some kudos for at least giving some effort to their respective roles. And for those of you who watched this particular production of Mozart's Don Giovanni live from the Royal Opera House, what'd you think of it? Did you feel like Roberto Tagliavini and Louise Alder stood out among the singers as the best of the evening? Did you feel that Erwin Schrott was a rather decent Don Giovanni? Did you feel that someone else stole their thunder? Or did you feel like there was someone who stood out like a sore thumb? Comment below and let me know. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in a few days from now where I review Puccini's Turandot live from the Metropolitan Opera House, starring Christine Goerke as the title heroine. So until then, good night everybody.